Hi everyone, this is Reverend Josh at Boise First United Church of Christ. We're so glad you've chosen to listen to our sermon this morning. We hope that you find yourself encouraged as we meet you wherever you are on life's journey.
I just wanted to say, I was filled with gratitude this last week. I have a friend who's another gay minister here in the Valley, and he went to Canyon County Pride. And he mentioned that when he told his board that he was going to go to Canyon County Pride and asked if it was okay if he missed a Sunday service in order to do that and represent the church in the interfaith service, that their response to him was, sure, if you want to do that, you can do that. And it kind of was like pain like an arrow. And I thought, wow, what a gift that I get to serve a church that didn't just say, sure, you can go do that, and that's fine, I guess, if you want to miss a Sunday for that. But I serve a church that actually showed up at Pride in a county that's not theirs and had a booth and met with people and engaged with people in such a way that extended love and compassion. So thank you to those who served at Canyon County Pride, but also thank you for allowing me to pastor in a church where I can miss on a Sunday to show up for something like that, and none of you are mean about it. So thank you. And so as we sit on this Mental Health Awareness Sunday and also Pride Sunday, I do just want to give a disclaimer that later in the service I'll be talking about suicide. So if that's at all triggering for you, please just do what you need to take care of yourself during this service. I think an interesting parallel between mental health and Pride Sunday, that there's an interesting question that I think sits at the base of both of those different types of groups. And I think that in many ways, folks who are LGBTQ or those who struggle with mental health, at some point a question often rises in them, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And so today I want to tell you about a woman in the Gospel of Mark that I think asked a very similar question for 12 years as she struggled with some things that were not quite right in her body. In Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 25, we begin the story. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and she had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather she grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched the hem of his garment or of his cloak. For she said, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. Immediately her hemorrhaging stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, though, Jesus turned about and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd, right? They're all pressing in on you. How can you say, who touched me? Little sassy. Jesus looked all around to see what he had done, who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came, fell down before Jesus, and told him the whole truth of her life. And he said to her, hear these words, church. He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Here's something that I think is helpful to know about this historical context of this story. This woman had been bleeding for 12 years. We understand that there's this constant flow of blood that medically would have put her at great risk and odds, but also religiously had put her on the outskirts of the community. In the book of Leviticus, we're told what the laws and rules are around women who are menstruating. And unfortunately, within the Jewish culture at this time, it was when a woman was menstruating or right after she had given birth, there was a period of time where they were no longer allowed in the temple because they were considered unclean. And this woman, having unstoppable bleeding for 12 years, would have been unwelcomed at the synagogue or at the temples. She would have been considered impure. She also would not have been invited to dinner parties. She would not have been invited to be around anybody who held any religious stature, because by simply being in her presence or possibly touching her or things that she touched, they would have been considered unclean. This woman has no temple, no community, no shared table, and perhaps that's for her maybe even worse than the bleeding. Scholars who studied in the first century would have noted that her marginalization wasn't only about her illness, but it was actually about what the community decided her illness meant about her. We know that this is still true today. But there was a strong, prevalent opinion and idea of that time, which was that if somebody is struggling with any type of physical illness or any type of mental illness, which they would have often determined was demonization or demon possession, they would have been determined that they had done something wrong and God was punishing them. Or their parents or generations before had done something wrong and God was punishing them. It's often how they would explain away children born with defects at birth, that there was some type of generational curse here. And so they would have determined that just because she had something medically going awry with her, that she was unclean, denied by God, kept at a distance, punished, and punishable by community. 12 years of this disease, it has not just cost her ritual access, but it has cost her whole social world. She's living on the margins of the margins. And Mark adds something devastating in this story, doesn't he? He says, she had endured under many physicians, and she had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather she only grew worse and worse. 12 years trying to get help, 12 years going broke, trying to expend all the money that she had, spending all of her deductible, and still nothing. Finally, 12 years believing that if she had just found the right treatment, maybe she could be made clean. Maybe she could be not just restored in her body, but back to community. And after 12 years, none of it is working. Does that sound familiar to any of you? So picture her on this day. She doesn't just approach Jesus face to face. She recognizes, and she's come very accustomed with being on the fringes. And so she grabs the fringes of his garment. She's become very accustomed about reaching for help without being seen, without being a bother. She's come very accustomed with trying to find food and the simpleties of life without being seen and others yelling, "You're unclean, get away, what is wrong with you?" She's come very accustomed with hiding. And so in the shadows of the crowd, she comes and she just touches the hem of the garment of Jesus' clothes. But it's interesting that this story is told right after a guy named Jairus confronts Jesus and asks for his own healing of a family member. And this Jairus is a person of power and influence, and he goes right up to Jesus and right into his face and just boldly asks. Talk about privilege, right? And yet you have this other woman that She can't do that. She's filled with fear and trembling. She would never be so bold. And Jesus turns and asks that curious question that the disciples are dumbfounded by. Who touched me? Because he recognizes that something has just transpired. He has encountered some type of energy that is undeniable. Have you ever met someone like that? Where you meet someone and you're like, wow, that was a powerful connection. There's just something about them that is just, I really like it. I just feel that, right? And you may have been at a cocktail event and you've talked to so many people, but yet that one person somehow just stands out. Maybe that's how you ended up in a marriage that you liked or didn't like. Maybe they charmed you, I don't know. But some type of energy was given off or given out in that moment. Now, here's the thing. When Jesus calls that out and the disciples make their little comment about, like, everyone's touching you, bro. Like, what are you talking about? It's fine. Why would you say that? How are we supposed to figure this out? What's interesting is that the woman doesn't stay quiet. She could have just slipped away and said, well, I'm made whole now. All is well. I'm not going to cause a fuss, or who knows where this might go or what might happen or why he's even asking. I bet there were plenty of times when she bumped somebody or touched somebody, and they immediately freaked out on her because they considered her unclean. And yet in this moment, this woman speaks up, and she says, I was the one that touched you. But it goes on, and it says that she told him her whole story, all of it, 12 years of it. She doesn't just say, I touched you. She's like, this is my story. This is my song all my days long. This is what's going on in my life. This is how I've been hurt by this community. And somehow I've just encountered you in such a way, and you have made me whole again. And Jesus hears this story, but more than that, everyone, remember there's a crowd, everyone around hears the story. And they hear this story that this guy named Jesus has been touched by this woman that they have deemed unclean, and Jesus is not upset with her. Jesus does not ridicule her. Jesus does not silence her or put her away, but instead he gives her a platform to share her story and to say, you are not something to be corrected or put away. You are nothing to be ashamed of. Instead, his response to her is curious. Look what he says.
he starts it with daughter. He calls her daughter. Something that she would have been told she was no longer. Something she would have been told that there was no way that God would call her daughter. That daughters don't have problems like this. If God truly loved her and blessed her, he would never give her such an infliction. And yet, Jesus upturns all their social and religious norms of the time and says, no, daughter. A word of belonging. How long had it been since she had been called daughter? In front of everyone who had rejected her for those 12 years, who treated her as a problem to be managed, Jesus says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. She came in carrying shame, but she left named as beloved in public, restoring not just her body, but her social status. The researcher Brené Brown has spent her career studying the idea of shame. And Brené Brown draws these two distinctions. Guilt is the feeling that I have done something bad. Shame is the feeling that I am something bad. See, guilt is useful because it points us towards repair. I did this thing, I messed up, and what can I do to make this right again? How can I ensure I don't continue to do these same things, right? Guilt is restorable, it's restorative. But shame leaves no room for repair because shame was never about what you did, it's about who you supposedly are. Shame doesn't whisper, you made a mistake. It whispers, you are the mistake. That woman had been taught for 12 years by her body, by religious law, by Roman customs, that she had failed treatments and that she was the problem. Not that something was happening in her body, that something was wrong with her. And I want to name today that there are two groups, I think, who often sit in this similar place of shame, of not being able to separate that out, and that it's often people living with mental health conditions as well as people in the LGBT community. For a long time, the world, tragically, even the church, has treated them as the very same category of problem. Until 1973, homosexuality was listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Something to be diagnosed, tested, cured, washed away. That's not ancient history, church. There are people in this lifetime sitting in these pews right now who remember that time and maybe even went through those forms of therapy or know loved ones that did. Your pastor who stands in this pulpit today went through reparative therapy to try to change my sexuality. Thankfully, I just missed the mark from when they decided, I just missed the mark from becoming straight, yes, but I heard some scoffing over here. Wow, all right. Yeah, he did. Look at those fingernails. I did miss the mark. I failed reparative therapy camp, for sure. But what I was saying was I just missed the mark as well, timeline-wise, when they did electric shock therapy on people. But I did go through a time where they spent 30 days fasting, trying to move God in order to change me, to show God how sincerely I wanted God to heal me. In this lifetime, in these pews, in this place, we have fought against that stigma. Something to be diagnosed, cured, treated. That's not ancient history, church. That is a lifetime sitting in this pews. People living with depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder continue to also fight these things. And other conditions, the same version of the same messaging that happens. Not, oh, you need extra support, but instead you're weak. Not just your brain chemistry needs some support and maybe some medicine, and maybe you need someone that can help you work through some of what's trauma is coming up, or mental challenges or chemical imbalances, but instead the response is you just need to pray more or have more faith. If someone's pancreas isn't producing enough insulin, we give them insulin and nobody whimpers or whispers about it. If someone's thyroid is underactive, we medicate it. And somebody doesn't call that a moral failure. Why? Bodies have imbalances, and that's just what bodies do, and brains are part of the bodies too, probably the most important part of the body. And when brain chemistry produces depression or bipolar disorder or anxiety disorder that just won't let go, that's not a character flaw, church. No, that is the biology asking for support just like the thyroid asks for support. But shame doesn't care about that distinction, does it? Shame just says something is wrong with you, hide it, fix it. Just in the dark, reach for the hem of the robe of the garment. My mother lived for years with bipolar disorder and anxiety and depression. Throughout my childhood, we didn't know what it was. It was undiagnosed because we went to a church where, if those feelings came up, it was like, just think good thoughts, just pray more, just fast more. You just need to have more faith, read your Bible, and once more faith comes, all that stuff will lift. We knew there were lots of highs and lows for my mom, and when I was a junior in college, which is when this picture was taken, I had just finished preaching a sermon when I got the call from my stepfather. He told my mom he wanted a divorce. My mom didn't know how to deal with this, and so she attempted to take her life by overdosing. My stepfather said, "She's your problem now." And I said, "Did you call the police or the paramedics?" He said, "I said she's your problem now." So I quickly called the paramedics, got in my car, left the church, rushing away. I called the ambulance and met the paramedics there. My mother was not conscious when I arrived. We went to the hospital, and I sat by her bed after they pumped her stomach. And then when she came to, I remember she was not relieved to be alive. I also remember that she was my problem now, as my stepdad said. So I had to make the difficult decision to give my mom some extended care in a hospital till she was no longer a danger to herself. When she was released, I had to figure out where she could stay and be, and so I set her up with a family in the church I was pastoring. We had a diagnosis also from this extended stay. We learned about what was going on and what kind of medications and therapy may be helpful for her. I learned more about mental health in that time in my life than I have yet to date. It was like a baptism by fire, and I'm still learning. And one of the most important things anyone ever told me in the middle of helping my mom navigate that was, we all have mental health the same way we all have physical health. It just varies during seasons of our life. It was a really important reminder for me to remember that just like my mom has mental health, I have mental health. And that it's just because hers requires a little bit more care or a little bit more medicine or a little bit more attention doesn't mean that my mental health is any different. And that there are actually, if I'm not conscious and aware and proactive and intentional, my mental health could also get to a really difficult place. And that I need to be aware there may be a season in my life when I'll need the same support that I had to give to my mother. It became an eye-opener to begin to see that mental health challenges were not a weakness, which is how I had come to view them. And that's what it means to be a person with a brain and a body in a world that's sometimes very hard. A few years later, I went through my own crisis. A different shape, same root, but shame. I spent years repressing my sexuality, as many of you know, and that shame around that conviction that something at the core of me was wrong, that I was broken and I was unacceptable to God, and that the people I loved would never accept me if they knew my full story. I sank deeper and deeper into a darker and darker hole and began to realize just how much of a mental health challenge I had myself. I began to consider taking my own life as I was pastoring a small independent Christian church in Kentucky, and just feeling more and more hopeless and lonely and angry with God for making me gay. After a long and slow process of deconstructing and reconstructing, it was learning just the way the woman in the crowd had to learn, that I didn't have to keep reaching for healing in secret, but instead I could come forward and I could tell my whole truth. And what waited on the other side wasn't condemnation. It was these words that I heard very clearly while at a weekend retreat of silence. I heard God say, "Child, you don't believe anything is wrong with you. You're just afraid of the people that do." And it was in 2015 that I said, "That's exactly right. And I will no longer reach for healing. I will no longer reach for the hem of Christ's garment in the dark. I will come out into the light. And I will experience my healing, and I will let go of the shame that something is wrong with me and recognize that something is just really wrong with the world." And I came out. And as I've shared before, my last Sunday at that church when I came out, the Supreme Court voted in favor of gay marriage. Yeah. So like I like to say, it was like the skies opened up and it was raining men. It was an exciting new time in my life, and that liberation that I experienced as I went through, and I look back now and I'm like, wow, I sometimes don't recognize the person I am now versus the person I was over a decade ago, who was considering ending his life because I couldn't separate guilt and shame. I thought something was wrong with me. And I thought that I needed to be changed, but instead it was my perspective that needed to be changed. Sometimes shifts in our mental health is just a change in perspective, finally seeing a lie for what it is. And sometimes it's medicine. Sometimes it's therapy and community and time. Sometimes it's just no single formula. Life is complex, and so are our minds and our bodies. That's not because help doesn't exist in this world, that 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. who experience mental health in a given year only seek support. That's a sad statistic. If you get down into the math of it, only 40% of adults with mental health condition receive treatment in a given year. That's not by accident. That's not just because of shame, but that's also often access to health, to medical care, and to mental health care and medicine. But it's a sad and staggering statistic, because it's shame or financial barriers that stand in the way, but also at its core, I think that it's an internal voice in our society that makes it difficult for people to seek help. But this story is beautiful, isn't it, in Scripture? The woman touched the hem of Jesus' garment because 12 years of shame had taught her to ask for healing while staying hidden. Jesus would not let her stay hidden, though. He turned around, he made room for her to tell her whole truth in public, for her to reclaim her voice and her presence, and then he gave her back her name, daughter. Not unclean, not a problem, but daughter, beloved, whole, go with pride. That is what pride is at its best. It's refusing to keep reaching for love from the shadows and instead standing up and telling our whole truth and discovering you were never the problem to begin with. When I go to Pride every year, I feel a little bit of shame, a little bit more just sort of peeled away, and a little bit more pride come up into me. That's why I go to Pride. Did you know that? That's why we have it? Is because we were taught to be ashamed of who we are. And when we gather with those who have pride, it's like touching the hem of another garment, passing that on a little bit. I don't have anything to be ashamed of who I am. And the pride rises. But even over a decade later, I still have shame that I have to keep to work off. I painted these nails yesterday. And oh man, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't have these. This is not going to be good. People are going to say things. People are going to judge me. I shouldn't paint my nails. And then I went to Texas Roadhouse, and this woman kept staring at me. And I thought, oh boy, she's judging me. And then she came up to me right after the meal was over, and she said, I just wanted to say how pretty your nails are. And I thought, wow, her husband looked like he was from Duck Dynasty. And I was judging them. And I thought, man, checking my spirit, shame a little bit gone, pride a little bit up. And I thought, wow, thank God for that. So if you see anybody out there who maybe you think, well, I bet that takes some courage to do that in Boise, Idaho, or in Napa, or Meridian, or Kuna, however you say it. And maybe you can instill some pride in them. Maybe you can reach out to the hem of your garment and let them just touch it and heal something inside of them. This is what pride is at its best, and that is what mental health awareness is too. It's refusing to let stigma keep you hidden in the crowd, managing your pain in secret, and instead it's calling you to reach for help, to name what is true and discover that needing support was never a moral failure, church. It was always just what your body and your brain need in this life. Guilt says, I did something wrong and I can repair it. That's survivable, even useful. And shame says, I am something wrong. And church, hear me say this to you. That is a lie from the pits of hell. I'm not a hellfire and brimstone preacher, but the style is still in there, okay? It was a lie told to a bleeding woman in the first century world. It was a lie told to my mother, and it was a lie told to this pastor, depressed and sad in a parsonage, wondering if he'd ever find a way forward. And it is a lie to everyone in this room carrying either of those stories today. You, church, whether you're LGBTQ or struggling with mental health, hear these words from your pastor. You are a daughter. You are a son. You are the kin of God, the beloved of Jesus, and the child that God never stopped loving. May you turn around to each person that you engage in this life and remind them of that reality. May you turn to Jesus today and hear the words, be healed of a chemical imbalance. Be healed of a belief that your gender or sexuality is wrong. And go from this place in pride, knowing there is nothing to be ashamed of. May you take delight in who you are, and may we take delight in one another and extend that same love that came out of the hem of a garment. Let us reach and let us heal. Amen?
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Boise First UCC podcast. We hope you found inspiration, encouragement, and a deeper connection to your faith and community. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we encourage you to subscribe, to leave a review, or share with your friends and family so that they can more quickly find us. Also, if you benefited from today's podcast, we invite you to make a donation at boisefirstucc.org/donate. Until next time, may you go in peace with curiosity and courage and a heart full of hope as we look toward our progressive Christian faith.